A week ago, Sony updated the PS4 with the now infamous Update 8.0, an update that aggravated most of the community and raised eyebrows over privacy concerns. I already made one video about all of that, so I'm not going to waste your time by retreading old ground on all the details, other than to say the update caused a variety of PS4 issues for many users, and it fundamentally changed the PS4's party chat system in a way that has been pretty much universally hated. What it also did was alert everyone that from now on, by using Party Chat, there's a possibility you'll be recorded and that by using it, you agree to that happening. At the time, there was no information about how exactly that recording system was going to work, how often you'd be recorded, or who was going to be listening in. All there was at the time was a brief explanation under the About Party safety screen that didn't explain the feature in any detail, but that did say it was implemented to help Sony enforce their community code of conduct for player safety. But with just that information alone, many people immediately expressed their privacy concerns about being constantly recorded, believing that Sony was going to be recording and listening into their conversations all the time. After all, how could any system be used to moderate what is being said if what is being said isn't constantly being recorded to enable that? It doesn't seem to make any sense, so it was quite a fair concern and it led to a lot of backlash. Almost immediately though, Sony released a clarification that day, in fact, confirming that the feature itself wasn't actually operating on the PS4 and that it wouldn't be functional until after the PS5 launched on November 12. And even then, only PS5 users would have the ability to submit those recordings from their PS5 console to Sony for moderation. The statement further clarified that Sony specifically would not be making those recordings, but that it would be the users in the party chats themselves who would record and submit those audio recordings. This obviously didn't allay people's fears, as it didn't clarify exactly how the users were going to do that. The backlash pretty much continued after that update, as most people saw that as Sony's recording you and they're going to use those recordings against you. Fast forward a couple of days, and Sony's VP for Global Consumer Experience, Catherine Jensen, responded to the backlash with a post on the PlayStation blog in which she apologised on behalf of Sony for failing to clearly explain how the new feature was going to work and, well, to also explain how the feature would work. Or at least try to. One of the concerns people had was that both their PS4 and PS5s would be listening to them from now on and to everything they say. Not so, according to Catherine Jensen. The post states, this feature will not actively monitor or listen in on your conversations ever, and that it's strictly reserved for reporting online abuse or harassment. Which isn't a completely accurate statement when you learn how the system works, but it's not too far off it. And I'll get to all that in a moment. First, the way it is going to work is the PlayStation will constantly record party chats but will only store the most recent 5 minutes. This is basically exactly the same as how the console constantly records gameplay. Gameplay is recorded constantly and depending on what you've set in your options will save out the last 5, 10 minutes or whatever when you choose to share that gameplay. This is essentially how voice chat recording will work too, though it will have a slight difference. If a user wants to use what has been recorded to report online harassment, they'll only be able to include a 40-second section of a voice recording. The post states that includes 20 seconds of the actual conversation with whoever they're reporting and 10 seconds before or after that, which is kind of a weird way of saying 40 seconds of the offending chat with 20 seconds specifically highlighted as the offending bit. To choose that 40 seconds though, the user will have to select it from a full 5-minute audio recording. The post also goes on to say there will be no option to opt out. This makes it sound like there's no option for anyone to opt out, but in fact there kind of is, because at the very first step a user has to opt in to recording on their PS5 first before the voice party chat recording will actually happen. The opt-out clause really refers to every PS5 user being recorded, as opposed to those doing the recording, since you won't know if you're currently chatting to someone who has opted in and whose PS5 is therefore recording you as you speak, meaning you really have no choice but to opt in to being recorded. Now, nothing in this post clarified whether or not a user must choose to save a voice recording, much like they would have to choose to save a gameplay recording. But what we do know is they don't have to start the recording manually. Merely opting in means their machine will always be recording. But at least for now, we'll assume they don't have to save it out first in order to make their 40-second selection. Sony's statement suggests the only manual aspect to any of this that falls on a user's hands is to choose to submit a report, after which they'll get to make a 40-second selection from the 5-minute voice recording that's already on their PS5 system, because they opted in for that. And since they have to opt in for that to happen, that definitely suggests they don't ever have to specifically choose to record or choose to save a recording. If this is true, then this makes the statement this feature will not actively monitor or listen in on your conversations not really correct. The noun definition of monitor is, after all, the keeping a continuous record of something, and this certainly qualifies for that definition, especially since you know that once a user has opted in, the PS5 will 100% of the time be actively recording. But that's really splitting hairs, if I'm honest. I think what Sony are really trying to say here is that in their perspective, it's not they who are listening or monitoring, much in the same way that if you were using something like OBS to record gameplay and you chat, that it's not OBS listening either. And I think that's perfectly fair, even if it's true that at some point they will be listening to 40 seconds of a recording when a user does submit it to them. So where does that leave everyone's concerns then? Somehow I think most people won't really have a problem with the general idea of Sony trying to come up with a way to support player online safety. I mean, they've got the same sort of responsibility digitally as a real-world business has physically to make sure their customers are safe too. You could even say they simply have to do it and they have no choice. In fact, Sony's motivation for this was heightened recently as a result of a pretty sad circumstance that I don't really think is my place to talk about here. But for those who know what I'm referring to, it's pretty easy to see that, at least in this case, Sony are trying to do the right thing by its users, whether you like their approach or not. So if we can all agree that they're at least trying to do the right thing, then the question or concern is, how far will they go with enforcing their community code of conduct? In the end, knowing that Sony themselves aren't listening in 24/7 and that nobody in Sony HQ itself is actively recording you either, I think that's what most people's concerns now really boil down to. The problem, though, is Sony's code of conduct itself because it's extremely broad. It's basically a catch-all for everything that isn't Disney-level behaviour, although maybe it's even harsher than that since you can swear in a Disney movie these days. And that's why I have a feeling those concerns aren't going to go away anytime soon for a lot of people. Ultimately, though, only time will tell. It'll all come down to how Sony enforce their code of conduct after the PS5 launches. If they start banning people for simply swearing, I'd honestly be very surprised at that, despite the fact that the code of conduct specifically does state you can't use vulgar or offensive language. I have a feeling they'll only enforce their conduct code to stop people being extreme over-the-top arseholes, and that's about it. I mean, doing anything else isn't really in Sony's interests if you really think about it. Just look at how many people in the comments section of my last video were screaming that they were now going to get an Xbox Series X instead of a PS5. There were a lot, and there's a lot more than that too on Twitter and Reddit saying exactly the same thing. But you have to remember, Sony is in the end a corporation. It's a business with a bottom line, and that bottom line needs it to sell as many PS5s as it can. But even then, Sony gets most of their money from their ecosystem, not from their hardware. And part of successfully doing that means keeping that ecosystem in a healthy state. To do that, they need happy users as well as lots of users. With a bunch of rabid shareholders pulling on one arm pushing for the numbers and a bunch of families on the other pushing for safety, that's a tough balancing act to get right. Now, I'm not defending privacy invasion here in any way, but what I am thinking is Sony can't balance that act by alienating millions of customers in the process. So whatever they do with their moderation, it will have to be seriously measured. Otherwise, Xbox Series X sales will go up and Sony shareholders will be the unhappiest of all. That's my take on it anyway. What do you think? Do you think Sony will really enforce their code of conduct to the letter? Do you think they'll mostly only use the system to warn people to tone it down? And that bans will only happen to the worst of the worst who, probably deserve it? Or do you think this is a whole can of nothing worms and everyone should just deal with it and that the whole backlash will just blow over? Let me know in the comments, and thanks for watching.